I was teaching at Insight Meditation Society with Ayamaidanandi. We did a 6-day retreat on Samatha meditation, and that was, I think, well received. It's something that a lot of people hadn't really explored. The importance of developing Samadhi is really a very vital, important part of the practice and has many benefits. It is, to begin with, the pleasant abiding here and now. It's called by the Buddha the blameless pleasure divorced from the senses. And the value of finding a peaceful mind is not to be minimized. It's extremely valuable, useful, and pleasant to find that peace of mind. We can talk about inner peace at all levels of practice, at the level of sila, of ethics. By keeping the precepts, you automatically experience a more peaceful existence, more trouble-free. When you think about the precepts, don't think of them as something like external commandments. It's not like the Buddha was arbitrarily laying down rules to bind people. It's more like a guideline. It's a rule of training. When you take the precepts in Pali, the phrase that's repeated for each precept is Sikkhapadani Samadhiyami, which means I shall make an attempt to follow this way of training, this Sikkhapadani. Padani is, literally it means like stepping, walking. So I follow this path or this way of Sikha is the student, the pupil. So it means like a rule of training. So I shall endeavor to train myself. It's often phrased like that in translation. I shall endeavor to train myself to refrain from harming and killing or taking that which is not given, etc. The precepts are more like wise advice of how to live peacefully, sensibly, calmly, harmoniously. They could be called like the owner's manual for a human condition. If you're in this human body, if you follow these ways of training, then you will have the maximum use and enjoyment of your human condition. That's the owner's manual. Thank you for choosing a human rebirth. We hope you will be pleased with your human body. Of course, there's no warranty. If you keep the precepts, then you avoid all kinds of trouble in your life. An example is a musawada veramani. If you refrain from false speech, then it becomes very simple and clear to speak to people because you don't have to keep track of who you told what. And then if you keep the precepts, then the mind is released from regret and remorse. You're not endlessly regretting things that you've done. You live in a harmonious way, and you don't get into so much trouble. With the precepts, you can experience a kind of external peacefulness, a peacefulness in your relations and in your externalities. It also begins the process of training the mind to be more peaceful. And a good example here is that the first precept, the precept against harming and killing. It's a little early in the year, but pretty soon we're going to have a lot of little visitors millions of mosquitoes. And before you know it, I've already seen a mosquito or two, but pretty soon there'll be many, many. And it's a very useful training to try and not kill the mosquitoes. And this goes against the ways of the world to a degree, because I think people in our society don't think twice about squashing a mosquito. It's just an ordinary thing to do. And if you haven't trained in that way of trying to practice harmlessness and not killing, at first you've got to restrain yourself from not killing the mosquito. It feels like an effort. And if you take on that training seriously, what happens is that you fake it till you make it. If you refrain from killing insects, then after a time, you no longer have the desire, the urge to kill them. And it flips around and you begin to have a real reluctance to hurt them. And if you accidentally hurt one trying to brush it off, you feel bad about it. This is an inner kind of peacefulness, ahimsa, harmlessness, which is one of the ways of right thought, thoughts of ahimsa, thoughts of harmlessness. If we go to the level of bhavana, mental development, which is what incorporates the whole field of meditation and our spiritual practice, then peacefulness as a goal takes center stage. It's quite integral to the path, to practice. One of the names of the Buddha is Sakyamuni, which means the silent one. Muni is silent, the silent one of the Sakyas. It's often translated the Sakyan sage, Sakya being his nationality. The Sakyan sage is the Sakyan silent one, literally. And the Buddhist order in the Buddhist time, and even down to today, has a reputation for quiet, for silence. There's a number of cases where this comes up in the suttas, that the wanderers of other sects were gathered in the Wanderers' Park, and this is the opening to several different suttas. It starts like this. So all these ascetics and holy men, wanderers, the various wise and crazy beings of India, that even down to the present day, but I think they were even more numerous in the Buddhist time. Everything from naked ascetics to strange shamanistic figures, and they're all gathered together in the Wanderers' Park, and described as being a noisy, clamorous scene, and they're debating loudly amongst themselves whether the world is eternal or not, whether the soul exists after death or not, and all this sort of thing. And then they see the Buddha or one of the Arahants or a group of monks coming, depending on the sutta, coming in the distance, approaching the park, and they say, "Oh, be quiet, venerable ones, be quiet. It would be good to have some conversation with the Sakyan sages, or with the Tathagata or whoever. Let's be quiet, because the followers of the Sakyan, they value quiet. They won't stay around if we're noisy." When King Ajatasattu came to see the Buddha, Ajatasattu was the king of Magadha, and he had killed his father to seize the throne, and he was ever after troubled by guilt and remorse about it. And he spent a lot of time after that trying to find some kind of spiritual guidance or solace, and one of his counselors, Jivaka, was a follower of the Buddha, said, "Let's go see the Holy One, he may have something to say." And they went to the Jetavana monastery, where the Buddha was gathered with hundreds of bhikkhus. And it was a full moon night, and they're riding in, and there's hundreds of bhikkhus sitting quietly with the Buddha in front. And Ajatasattu became terrified. He thought, this is a trap, bringing me to be assassinated. How could so many people be so quiet as this? And this was said to be due to his guilty mind, that he couldn't appreciate the silence. So he hadn't been able to find that inner silence that we develop with the meditation. The next level of peacefulness is to finding the inner peace, not the external peace, but the inner peace. Even if you have found peaceful external situation, the mind can be a turmoil. You can have all kinds of anxieties or old memories or unfulfilled desires, restlessness, and these kind of things can come into the mind. This is called blazing by day and smoking by night, like a pile of rubbish that never goes out. It's like if you've ever tried to burn a pile of sawdust, it's like that. It never, it takes months for a thing to finally burn out. The mind is churning around, and it's unpleasant to be caught in that. And we try and find a peaceful abiding. The breath is a excellent vehicle for finding peacefulness, because the breath is inherently in its nature peaceful bodily activity. It's repetitive and automatic. The body just does it. There's no feeling of stress. It's just a peaceful movement of air in and out of the body. It has a tendency to pacify the mind when you put the attention on the breath. It's a meditation that's said to be sublime in the beginning, sublime in the middle, sublime in the ending. Meditators often come into the practice for different reasons and different kind of ideas or expectations. And sometimes you find people have a kind of a spiritual greediness, that they want to experience various kinds of special states of mind, or various kinds of psychic experiences. That becomes a hindrance to have these, this kind of agenda, and it takes a kind of a maturity of practice to realize that the flashy stuff is not really ultimately desirable. It's a calm, clear, spacious, peaceful mind is infinitely more useful and desirable than any amount of kind of fireworks. And we see this in the progression through the jhanas. It's always towards a more calm state of mind. And the best way of understanding the progress through the jhanas is the movement of the mind from the gross to the subtle. Taking those terms in a relative sense. So what is subtle at one stage, then in the higher stage is perceived as gross. There's no factor that could be called in its own absolute nature, gross or subtle. They're relative terms. So to begin with, before we take up samadhi, the mind is entirely caught up in the world of the senses. And within the world of the senses, there's a range of gross and subtle. That some sense experiences are gross, noisy, clamorous, what the world might call exciting. And others are subtle, more refined, more ethereal. Sensuality refines itself as it progresses. And at some point, you transcend sensuality altogether, and then you're into beyond the realm of sense desire, into the realm of form, which is the realm of jhana. And for the mind that's got deep samadhi, anything to do with the senses seems gross, undesirable. It's like a heavy kind of way of experience that's not sought after by that mind. And when the senses are not engaged in, then what's left as the heaviest dross in the mind is the process of thought. And this is still present to a degree in first jhana, because vitakka vichara are jhana factors there. The mind, the engagement of the mind with the object is the same energy that we use for the thinking process. And the thinking process is more subtle than the sense realm. When the sense realm is made quiescent, then the thinking is the coarsest factor remaining, and the mind begins to withdraw from that. Then in second jhana, the factors that remain are piti, sukha, and ekaggata. Piti is it's often translated as rapture. It's the excitement or thrill in the body of happiness, an energetic feeling that comes with calming of the body-mind system. There's an energetic release. And sukha is a deeper happiness, a kind of blissful state. And ekaggata is the mind that's very still, unified on a single object. So now the piti is the coarsest factor remaining. And if the mind continues to develop, it begins to withdraw from piti and seeks out the experience of sukha, the blissful happiness, which is a steady calm. It's not in any way could be called exciting. But then even that can seem coarse, and the mind in fourth jhana takes its refuge in equanimity, upekkha, which is the great peacefulness of mind when it's experienced at that level. It's called sukham parisukham, the bliss beyond bliss. It's a poetic kind of trope. The mind experiences this great peacefulness. Another way to work on peacefulness of mind is using the Brahma Viharas, the divine abidings, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. This is particularly worthwhile to take up as a practice if you are troubled with feelings of anger, irritation. You're not peaceful 100% in your external relations. Then this is a way of working directly on the internal alignment. Make yourself more peaceful internally. Take up loving kindness. May all beings be well and happy. At the third level of practice, the level of wisdom, panya, understanding the real nature of things, which is what we are striving to do with the insight, trying to look at the real nature of things. When you begin to understand the void nature of all phenomena, then this is a very profoundly peaceful place to be. A lot of the, ultimately all of the fear and anxiety that can arise in the mind is based on a conception of self. There's a sense of this self is something to be protected. It needs to be somehow secured. And because samsara being the nature that it is, there's no real security to be found anywhere. Everything is always breaking up and falling apart and changing and altering. And there's nothing can be relied on within the conditioned world. And as long as you're trying to find that niche in the conditioned world that's completely safe and secure, you're going to suffer. And you want to have that position because you have a false idea of a self as being something worth protecting and trying to prevent any harm coming to what is perceived as me and mine. But when you see that it's all empty and it's all void of substance and there is no self to guard or protect, then it's extremely peaceful. This is one of the characteristics of the enlightened being, is abhaya, this fearlessness. This Buddha Rupa in the corner is in the abhaya mudra. The hand up is the fearlessness mudra. It's one of the aspects of generosity, is the giving of fearlessness by being harmless, by being no threat. It's considered a form of generosity, that you can be present amongst beings and they don't feel in danger. They don't feel like they have to protect themselves in any way. By you just, if you're emanating this peaceful vibe, the harmlessness. It's a gift that you give to other beings. And parallel to this idea of peacefulness, we could see the same kind of structure in the idea of happiness. That in one of the chants, the sharing of merit chant, there's a line, may all beings experience the threefold bliss. And what's that referring to? That's the bliss or the happiness, the word is sukha, of the senses, the worldly happiness, the happiness of meditative mind, jhana, and the happiness of nibbana, 3 levels. That there is happiness of a kind to be found in the world of the senses. But it's fleeting and it's dependent, and it always ends badly. Inevitably it falls away. There's no experience within the realm of senses that can be relied on. It's a momentary, transient, changing, imperfect kind of happiness, but it is a kind of happiness. The happiness of the jhanas is more subtle, it's more refined, it's longer lasting and more stable. It's still not everlasting. It falls away as well. It's still conditioned, but it's beyond anything that can be gained strictly through the senses. And the happiness of nibbana is, again, we're using the word happiness here in a more poetic sense. This cannot even really be classed as happiness. It's an indescribable state. It's not within the same context as anything else. But it surpasses, transcends everything else. The realization of the unconditioned. It's the ultimate goal of the whole path. That's in the funeral chanting that we do. Anicca vata sankhara upadava yadamino upajitawa nirujanti te sang upasamo sukho. So alas, impermanent are all compounded things. Their quiescence is the highest bliss. That the rising and falling, the coming into existence and falling out of existence of the sankharas, the conditioned phenomena, is suffering. It's the conditioned world. And when this process is quiescent, this is nibbana, and the mind is transcended manifestation, transcended phenomenality altogether. This is the highest kind of peace and the highest kind of happiness.